Thank you. I now call to order the MWPA Executive Committee meeting of November 2nd, 2023. Martina, could you please call the roll?
Certainly, starting with Director Goins.
Here.
Director Hilliard.
Here.
Director Kurtz.
Here.
President
Here.
President McMillan.
Here.
And I do believe Director Rodoni might be just a few minutes late today.
Correct. Thank you. Number 3, I will entertain requests to adjust the order of the agenda. Any requests? Number 4, open time for public expression. The public is welcome to address the executive committee at this time on matters not on the agenda that are within the jurisdiction of the committee. Please be advised that pursuant to Government Code Section 54954.2, the committee is not permitted to discuss or take action on any matter not on the agenda. Comments may be no longer than 3 minutes and should be respectful to the community. Please silence your cell phones during the meeting and mute your microphone when you're not reporting out. Martina, is there any public comments?
If there are any members of the public wishing to speak on the current agenda item, the open time for public expression, please raise your hand in the reactions. And for those joining by phone, please press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to mute yourself throughout the meeting. And President McMillan, it does not look like there are any hands for comment.
Thank you. Number 5, Executive Officers Report. Mark Brown will now present the Executive Officers Report.
Good morning, President McMillan, board members. Start my screen share. And just as a reminder, November is Native American Heritage Month. Important for so many reasons. I won't begin to try to connect with all the reasons why it's important, but I do think it's timely that today is also a day that County Fire with San Rafael Fire and State Parks is doing a prescribed fire up in China Camp State Park. Trying to bring back some of the land practices the Native Americans practiced prior to us stopping them. And I also want to mention to the board that staff is working on an appropriate land acknowledgement that we can have as part of our openings to our meetings. But we're taking a thoughtful approach because we want it to be a sincere land acknowledgement rather than, okay, we checked a box and said we have a land acknowledgement. So we are making sure that we do it in a very thoughtful way. And I can also attest through my experience with Marin County Fire and how MWPA is approaching connections with the tribe and making sure that our work is done in a culturally sensitive way and that we're valuing the cultural assets that are out in our lands. The change that we have gone through is remarkable. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. Fire season, same routine as what I've been saying. It's been a delightfully slow fire season, but we're not out of it yet. We're going to have the fall weather pattern where we have a low pressure system built, followed by a offshore event. How strong that offshore event is going to vary. Southern California did get a few fires that were popping up into the thousands of acres. And so that's kind of cool that we're only getting thousands of acres instead of tens or hundreds of thousands of acres, but we're not out of the woods yet. But I think one of the things that really adjusted our fire season this year is that the live fuel moistures from the winter carried through much of the summer. We have not hit the critical levels of live fuel moisture yet, which is remarkable. We're normally hitting that in September. So I think that had a big impact. And we continue to see the reactivity to the rains between the 10, 100, and 1,000-hour fuels. We did want to bring up that MWPA participated in a meeting with a project that UC Berkeley is participating with us. It's a project called Smart and Connected Communities. It's both in Alameda County and in Marin County. They're creating what they call a digital twin, and that it allows us to simulate disasters and other events in a digital environment and see how they will react in our communities. Where it comes to impact us is that we are looking at evacuation planning within that digital twin, and they're creating a smart video game and a board game. And it's the goal is to allow our community members to experience an evacuation through a video game rather than real life, and to allow them to make mistakes in a video game environment rather than in real life. This is going to be very informative for our public. UC Berkeley is working closely with us and fire modeling so that we actually portray an accurate fire environment or an accurate traffic environment, as opposed to what some people see in the media, which isn't necessarily an accurate portrayal of what evacuations are like. We're super excited about this. We have seen storyboards for the game already. And what they intend to do is to create personas. And you can play this game in a persona. You could choose to be a parent of children that are in school and work through the evacuation problem as a parent. You can choose to be an elderly resident that does not have a vehicle. And so we're trying to create a dozen or so personas that vary across the, our demographics of the community, so people can identify with the persona that they are doing the evacuation through. We did get invited to participate in last week's Marin County Disaster Preparedness Forum. Rich Shortall and I teamed up on our presentation, and I thought it went really well. We generated great feedback, and I thought the participation was pretty good. And then really appreciated Supervisor Lucan's opening discussion to the crowd, and then Stephen Torrance. I would say he killed it. He was phenomenal through that whole event. Grant season, and I say grant season not for the grant program that the MWPA is administering for our residents. It's grant season for us, and we are doing a lot of grant applications. We are putting the finishing touches. They extended the deadline for the Community Defense Wildfire Grant, which we are looking to fund the San Rafael, San Anselmo fuel reduction zone as part of that grant. CAL FIRE just opened up its fire prevention grant applications yesterday, which closes in January. So staff is working on what we're going to put together for that. And then we continue to identify projects for any coastal conservancy funding. And then a little bit of more networking. MWPA was asked to participate in the Agricultural and Wildfire Policy Work Group, a statewide committee. CalCan and the Community Alliance of Family Farmers are the two hosts of this. And the goal of this working group is to align ag practices with wildfire defense and mitigation. And quite frankly, many of our ag community members in West Marin feel like they're not getting the recognition of the work that they do that actually helps promote wildfire mitigation. And perhaps at times feel like they're not getting their bang for the buck from Measure C because they are doing so much work that some of our work doesn't have to happen on the ranch lands. But there's some other intersections, like the whole idea that there are cattle ranchers that pay to get property to graze, but then we turn around and pay people to come graze on other properties. So we want to find some way to even that out. So it was we had our first meeting 2 days ago, and there was a lot of we kind of set objectives, what we wanted to get out of this, and it was a real positive conversation. And I'll close with our COC recruitment started. Well, actually, we started last week. We started early. We had everything in place, so we figured we might as well start early. So it's up live on our website, and then we'll be pushing out social media through our own social media. We'll be asking member agencies to support that push. Fire Safe Marin is including this in their November newsletter. And then we are securing ads in the Marin IJ, the Marin Post, and Point Reyes Light. And with that, I'll stop my screen share, take any questions.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Great report. Questions from the committee? Bruce?
Mark, great report. I just have a real quick question about, and it is that recognize that we received a grant that the board approved last board meeting. $2.6 million came from CAL FIRE. Who authored that grant is my question.
Our team authored it in conjunction with Nevada Fire's team. Okay.
And I just asked then that, we please, express our, thanks and respect for their, excellent work. I mean, it's so welcome. And so if you please explicitly
will do
recognize them, I appreciate it. Thank you.
I'm just wondering when the video game will be ready.
Probably 6 months to a year.
Okay.
I would imagine. We're at the storyboard phase. I've never been involved in creating the video game. We actually didn't talk timeline on it yet, though.
Okay. And are there any federal grants that might be available that we're looking at?
So the Community Defense Wildfire Grant is a federal grant that that have applied for.
Great. It's Jared Huffman's office helping us?
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cool.
Public comment, Martina?
If there are any members of the public wishing to speak on the executive officer's report item only, please raise your hand in the reactions or press star 9 to raise your hand. Star 6 to unmute if you're joining by phone. And there are no hands for comment.
Thank you. I will now bring this item back to the committee for any further discussion. Okay, number 6, consent calendar. The opportunity for public comment on the consent calendar items will occur prior to the committee's discussion of the consent calendar. The committee may approve the entire consent calendar with one action. There's only one item. So any public comment on the consent calendar?
If there are any members of the public wishing to speak on the consent calendar item, please raise your hand in the reactions. Or press star 9 if you're joining by phone. And there are no hands for comment.
Great. Does any committee member wish to pull the item? Okay, could we have a motion, please?
I'll make a motion to approve consent.
Second.
Motion by Rachel, second by Catherine. Roll call.
Director Goings,
Aye.
Director Hilliard,
Aye.
Director Kurtz,
Aye.
Director McMillan.
Aye.
Director Redoni is not present for this vote, but that is unanimous for all of those in attendance.
Thank you, Martina. Number 7, Citizens Oversight Committee. A Citizens Oversight Committee member, I believe it's Jennifer Howard, will present this report.
Actually, for this portion of it, the COC said that they have no additional information to add. But I did want to add that they have created 4 ad hoc subcommittees to start working on the 22-23 annual report. One is to look at the local projects, one for D-Space projects, one for core projects, and then a transparency. And I've either met personally with or virtually with all 4 of the subcommittees. And so they are already pounding away at the work.
Okay. Questions about this item from committee members? Anybody?
Just a comment.
Yes.
I thought that was a very good report that they produced, and I also felt happy that they found everything in order and that we were spending the money the right way. Thanks.
Rachel, did you have anything? No. Okay, I have one question / comment. They say that, let me see. In many areas, the level of transparency is good. But they didn't identify any areas where the level of transparency is in any way deficient. So I'm wondering how we get to be better than good.
Well, and I guess that our next agenda item is for me to present to you the actual annual report. This was just an update on their
Oh, I'm sorry.
current activities. So, but I'm happy to move on to the next agenda item if you're ready.
Thank you. Getting ahead of myself.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to, public comment on this, Martina.
If there are any members of the public wishing to speak on the current agenda item, please raise your hand in the reactions or press star 9 to raise your hand if joining by phone. And there are no hands for comment.
Great. Any further discussion? Number 8, now.
Now,
Citizens Oversight Committee Report fiscal year 2021-22. Mark.
yes. And first and foremost, I want to express the MWPA's profound thanks for all the work that the COC is putting in towards the MWPA. They are oversight committee. They are making sure that we are spending the taxpayers' money appropriately. However, they're a group that wants to see the MWPA succeed. However, they're doing it in a way that they aren't just a rubber stamp. And many of their observations have made the MWPA a better organization. So I really do want to thank them for that. And this is the second annual report from the COC. It was the first report with a robust core work plan. If you remember, our first year had a very light core work plan. this was the first year that had a robust core work plan. So it definitely created an increase in their workload. And with no further delay, I'll just start I'll briefly go through each of the findings and the staff's observations or response to that. The first one is an interesting one, and that's finding 1A, talking about the 10% administrative cap. It's very clear that for core projects, we have a 10% administrative cap. It's very clear in the language that if the MWPA was administering a DSpace program, we would have a 10% administrative cap. However, it's less clear in the JPA language whether that 10% administrative cap applies to the member agencies managing their own DSpace program and managing their local mitigation projects, the pass-through funding. And for a non-attorney person, I had a huge lesson in the difference between IE and EG in JPA language. I had no clue there was a difference, but apparently there is. And it says IE, and it just lists core and DSpace administered by the MWPA. So it means it's kind of inclusive of those, exclusive of the potentially exclusive of the others. But I can tell you, after speaking with the authors of the JPA and after and through experience with the member agencies, we all assumed that 10% administrative cap spanned all Measure C money. The idea was to use Measure C money for action on the ground. So the member agencies have been holding themselves accountable to that 10% cap. COC appropriately is asking for clarification on that. And so that plays into an ad hoc working group that we've created to make recommendations to JPA amendments. This was motivated mostly because of the Mill Valley merger with Southern Marin Fire, and we needed to clarify that language. But if we were going to open up the JPA, that seemed like a good time to take a total review. So we were able to create, I think, a very robust working group to tackle this. Megan is our counsel. We have Matthew Heimel from the county, Dan Eilerman from the county, Jason Weber, county fire chief, and Dan Schwartz as a member of this working group, people that were intimately involved in the creation. They know the why behind the language. But we do have to point out that for creating JPA language for an organization that was first of its kind, there were remarkably few adjustments that we are making recommendations to. So our first meeting of this working group was yesterday, and had a fantastic conversation. And they all agree that 10% was supposed to be overlaid all of the Measure C funding. So the amendment that you'll be seeing us bring to the board. And then let me back up a little bit and talk about the process that we recommend for the JPA adjustment. Is that we're working with this group. We had great feedback. We may be able to wrap up this group's feedback virtually, or we may need to have one more meeting. And then staff will be asking the president of the board to create an ad hoc subcommittee of the board to go through and get their recommendations, then bring the JPA to the full board, and then do our round of 17 visits, which requires 75% of our member agencies to say yes to. So that was all of that work I just said will help when we get down to some of the other findings, just to know that we are working on the JPA, and there was 100% consensus amongst that group that the 10% admin cap goes all the way through. And feel free as I work through any of the findings, if you want to stop and ask me any questions, please.
And Mark, thanks. A great explanation. My question is, in amending the language, then aren't we going to have to do some detailed staff work in regards to how administrative fees are in fact determined? I've never seen anything all that clear historically as far as informative steps of the agency, but so my question is, beyond the language, will there be some staff work to clarify the administrative process to credibly document your administrative costs?
And I'll be able to cover that in some of the other findings that we have in here today, and the process that we've actually been following already and that we have improved upon. But we also have created the definition of administrative work within our budget preparation policy.
You're saying that it is already in place?
Mm-hmm. the definition of administrative is in place, then it's a process of staff assuring that member agencies are not exceeding that.
Thanks. This is great.
Okay, if there's no other questions, I'll move to finding 1B. And that is just a minor technicality. As you saw, 0.06% short on the abatement. And while it's a minor technicality, there is a little bit further discussion I would like to discuss. And that is when the JPA language was written, they built in an abatement fund, which was 2% of the DSpace monies to create a pool for abatements. And what an abatement is if a resident has not done the work that we would like them to do on their property, we can actually go onto their property, do the work, and then put a lien on their property, and get the money back. There was also a thought that MWPA could be the abating agency when this language was written. However, that is not the case. We cannot do the abatement. It's the member agency that must do the abatement. And the way the DSpace language is written, they can already use their DSpace money for abatements. We've had 100% consensus of the advisory technical committee and of the operations committee saying we really have no interest to use that abatement fund. We would like to see it go away. And so in yesterday's discussion with the working group for the JPA amendments, there was consensus amongst that group. Let's just strike the abatement out of the DSpace and pass through all of the monies as if that abatement didn't occur. And then what we could do through board action is we have an abatement pool that has been created. How we would disseminate that back to the member agencies, staff's recommendation would be prorated to the percentage to match the deep. So long answer for that one. But again, the longer the answers are at the beginning, the shorter ones are coming.
As in the previous, does this can require board action again, 75% board to vote because it's in the language right now. So you're saying that we may strike it.
It'll go through the JPA amendment process that I described.
Okay. Thank you.
Financial finding 1C. I actually picked up on an error in this finding in reviewing my notes yesterday. And that is the target minimum expenditure for vegetation management was 9 million, and it says 80% of the core program's target, which is was actually I need to rework that percentage. It's not 80%. So again, 60% is our target, and then 80% per the zones. And I think the carve out for JPA wide projects, which do contribute to each of the 5 zones, is subtracted here. So I'll work with the committee to fix that 80% piece there. But what's important is that we continue to put 60% of Measure C funding towards the core. And the data really does support that we are doing that.
So that'll be cleaned up for the board meeting.
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Now, financial finding 1D, and this is an important caveat of the JPA language, is that 80% of the 60% will be spent in the zone in which the revenue came from. And if you remember, each year when we get our report, our tax proceed report, we actually have a formula worked out that we know to the penny how much money came from each of our 5 zones. And so we're able to set that 60%, then 80% very accurately. If you remember year 1, very light core. So it was just a few JPA wide projects. And it's important to recognize that JPA wide projects are implemented in all 5 zones. So we do have a process to identify how much of the JPA wide revenue landed in each of the zones. For public education, it's a little bit nuanced. You can't really say, well, we held this many people accessed our social media for public education, access YouTube for videos. So what we do is we take the prorate of the percent revenue for that zone. I'll use Novato as an example. Novato is 26% of our revenue. If we, and I'm going to make round numbers, $1 million in public education, we assume 2.6 million or 260,000 was in Novato. So for those things that where we really can't say exactly where the zone was spent, we're prorating. But when it comes to chipper days, we know exactly how much was in chipper days. So we take all the JPA wide revenue or spending and have a spreadsheet that says in this zone, this is how much we spent. In this zone, this is how much we spent. Then we take all the core projects, add them up for each zone, and take that JPA wide number and add it to it. And that's how we come up whether or not we spent 80% in that zone. I know it's complicated, but we actually have worked that out. And the spreadsheet that you see here, we now have that will actually easily account for us where we're spending the money. And it also starts back with our work plan development. Every project has a code that identifies what zone that spending is happening. So in the spreadsheet world, it's actually pretty easy. It's easier than the process I just explained to you. And remember that year one, we definitely did not get to that 80% of the 60% in each zone. Year two, I think we caught up faster than I thought we were going to catch up. You can see that only 2 of the zones are under the 80%. My staff report says we feel that this will smooth out in 23, 24. We haven't crunched all the numbers yet, but there's actually a really good chance it's going to smooth out in 22, 23. So the requirement is that we don't meet that every year. The requirement is that we meet it after 5 years, and staff is confident we will meet that threshold in 5 years. Nothing? All right.
Good.
One of the flavor for the next few findings is how much are we making sure that local spending and D-space spending is in alignment with Measure C. As you know, right now, the work plan is kind of divided into sections. There's the core, which the board approves the core budget and the core projects. And then there's local and D-space where the board doesn't approve them, they acknowledge them. But it's staff working behind the scenes during development of the work plan, during implementation of the work plan, and then in the end of year review, looking back to make sure that those projects were in fact in alignment with Measure C. Last year's process, as this observation and this finding says, wasn't as solid as it could have been. And part of it had to do with the MWPA being a growing organization, that when this fiscal year started, you're looking at the 2 employees that existed. We didn't quite have the bandwidth, and our reporting system that we asked the member agencies to report back in some places was lacking in not lacking in detail, but lacking in being able to digest what was delivered. We had some very complicated budget reports that were sent to us that if you know how to read public budget reports, you can read between the lines and actually see what people did, but it wasn't easily digestible. And so this observation for 2A, 2B, I think is accurate. And this is where the COC has helped us improve as an organization. And so the process that we implemented this year is that we have a spreadsheet that was populated for each member agency that had the core projects, had their local projects, D-spaces. Then it had, this was how much was budgeted, how much did you spend, how much was it over or under budget, if it was under budget, why, and also a caveat that you must use any of the reserves, the unspent reserves on Measure C activities. Then we have the budget reports, the complicated budget reports I told you about, to support what they put in that spreadsheet. So we're not just taking it for granted that the spreadsheet was accurate. So we have a really robust process going now. And then rather than going through each and every project with a fine-tooth comb, we're selecting different types of projects for deeper review. And for this year, I selected projects that require staff to be hired by the member agencies. And so for the core projects and local projects that had significant staff positions, I've requested further information from those member agencies, and they have been sending that information back to me for that review. So we do concur with that finding. And we have already adjusted our process for 22-23 to fix that. Part of it also, that's kind of covers 2A and 2B. COC wanted, and I'll just put this as a side note, COC included, they wanted to know why the monies weren't spent on a local project, and valuable data for us, totally valuable data for us, but I'm not sure it's quite in the purview of the COC to ask why it wasn't spent. But we included that in the spreadsheet because it's very valuable data for us. 2C finding is to make sure that any of the local core and D-space projects are increasing the level of service for that organization prior to Measure C. And for fiscal year 21-22, we didn't have great data what was happening in pre-20 or pre-2019, or essentially we asked for data for 2019-20 fiscal year. We're still collecting that data. We're still setting that benchmark, but having historical knowledge of what the member agencies were doing, we're able to anecdotally say that they're all improving, but we're fine tuning that. So we do concur with this finding, and we are developing process to improve upon it. And then finding 2D, there's a couple different nuances, and that is allowable costs, and also that nuance I mentioned of whether or not the board should acknowledge local projects and D-space projects, or should the board approve. Staff feels that the definition of allowable costs is appropriate, and I think the board action that the board took to approve that policy is appropriate. I think we have the details. In fact, it's literally cut and pasted. Much of this language is cut and pasted out of the JPA language and the ordinance. So staff does feel that that is clear. Where staff does have a little bit of agreement with the COC is it's not clear in the JPA whether the board should approve or acknowledge local or D-space. And so that's really the spot that I'm going to be looking to board members. Do you think the process that we have is the appropriate process now, or should we, as we are working through the JPA amendment, maybe we don't even have to do it in the JPA amendment, amend our process to have board approval of local and D-space versus board acknowledgement of local D-space? And with that, I'll pause. Love to hear your thoughts.
Thoughts?
I use the battery that fast.
Will the COC review the responses and come back with a written response to our responses, or is this, how does this information now go forward?
Sorry. The process we followed last year, there wasn't a response to our response. It was part of their review for this current report. So at the end of it, you saw a list of their findings and how we reacted to them. And that's how that would most likely play out. They'll say, all right, we had this finding, you reacted this way to it. We agree or disagree with it.
And the other question is, do you have an idea with the adjustments that are going to be coming with the JPA? They're going to go back to the jurisdictions to get approved by our councils. Do you have a timing around that so we can get it on make sure they're on their calendar?
I anticipate the ad hoc working group to wrap up in the next month or two. And then it would be in January that we ask the board to create an ad hoc subcommittee, probably bring the results back in February-ish, and then have a spring run of 17 meetings.
And you'd want to have it done by, maybe work backwards. It has to be done by.
It'd be great if it was completed by July 1.
Yeah, right.
With a strong indication of which direction we're going during the work plan development.
Okay.
How would the local jurisdictions react if the board is approving their projects?
That's a really, really good question.
It seems to me like we don't want to make this more cumbersome
No.
and more pressure, and we want to give them some autonomy for their own. I don't know that the staff has the bandwidth to look and make recommendations about local projects, and I don't know that the board should be in that business, but I'm wondering what you think.
I personally like the process we have, and I think that the board currently has the authority to, even though they are just acknowledging a local and D-space project, I feel the board has the authority, especially if staff recommends such. No, you know what, that project isn't appropriate. Let me, and there's actually been projects that member agencies have said, well, this is what we're thinking, and staff has gone, yeah, that's not a really good idea. And they've stopped it. That member agency has not moved forward with that, but and we'll just be super blunt. The positions that are of the most concern right now are the law enforcement type ranger positions. And we're asking the agencies that have proposed and used those positions to provide a better argument, because I think there's a great argument to use Measure C money for that type of effort, but we're not seeing the great argument to support that. So we are asking the member agencies that have those positions to create a better argument for those positions. And if they don't, then it could be staff's recommendation to the board. You probably should direct that member agency to make a change. And I think we have that mechanism already. I don't know if we need to go through the full process of changing it, our process that we have now.
I agree with that.
Okay.
Any other thoughts on that issue?
I agree as well. I think that as a board, we're kind of serving like a judiciary. If somebody has a problem, you know exactly what our mission is. You negotiate, talk with the agencies. If there's a problem, then I think it can come before us. So it's kind of, it muddies the waters if we get involved at the beginning, in case there is a challenge that comes back to the board.
That's great feedback. Thank you. I told you we're going to get faster, and it starts here. And finding 2E is virtually identical to 1A. So I'll just leave it at that. Finding 2F is related to 2E and that this goes to Bruce's question, and that is the process behind if we do say 10%. And yes, we are building that in. We have built that into the process because we assumed that was the case, and we'll continue with that. So that makes that one easy. So finding 2G is interesting, and I would say after year one, staff might have been more inclined to concur with the finding, but as the MWPA has matured, the different chipper, and this is specific really to the differences in chipper programs and grant programs. As the MWPA has matured, we have gotten much more alignment. That year one, MWPA wasn't in a position to have a grant program, so member agencies created their own, which was totally appropriate. Year two, there were remarkable differences between the grant programs between JPA wide and member agencies. Year three, much better alignment. And I think most importantly, and we felt that this was a huge step forward, is that we're all using, even though they might be a different chipper program, they might be a different grant program, we are all using the same program to administer those. We're creating a seamless environment for the residents, and the data is all coming into one place. We also think it's important to recognize that as small as Marin is, our communities are different from each other, and our member agencies we feel need to have the flexibility to create a program that matches their community rather than what matches one size doesn't fit all. So we do like I said, year one, I agreed with this, but as we've matured and brought in alignment and was able to use the same accounting and administrative systems to support these, I like where we're at now.
Yeah, I found this a little difficult to process, just as a comment, Mark, in that, member agencies are autonomous, and, within their own jurisdictions, trying to do the best they possibly can. And, you know, their core program, core projects, and then defensible space and the grants. And, you know, I think this just points to how we talk about outcomes associated with the work that we're doing. I think that's really the core point here. And that we, and I'm not sure I have all that still in my all in my head, but you know, we have committed, we have a strategic plan, we have goals and objectives and metrics and monitoring. I think the key question really is are we headed, are we addressing the vision in our strategic plan, and are we actually affecting a change, which those metrics and monitoring are supposed to show? So there's something in here about us making sure that we're cognizant of that, and we continue to mature in articulating how we're moving the needle. Because I really think isn't that the core question here?
And I have to say that the process that we've been working through to develop, and I'll focus on goals 1, 3, and 5. Goal 1, veg management. Goal 3, grants. Goal 5, D space. Those are the ones that we've developed metrics for. Yes. And we have been working hard behind the scenes for a public dashboard for the metrics that are for the public to digest. And then we have a deeper dive dashboard that's for the member agencies. And working through that process actually has really brought our consistency to the program, which is exactly what a strategic plan is supposed to do. And so we feel that's very successful. Goals, those dashboards for goals 1, 3, and 5 are still in beta. We're just polishing up some of the final pieces. And so I think once those become visible, to your point, this becomes less of a concern.
Okay, I guess then my point is in our response is that it is to clearly articulate that we do have we do have a strategic plan in place, and we do have specific goals and objectives. We do have metrics, and we do have monitoring, and we have systems in place right now that I think maybe need to be actually recognized. We are indeed tracking, as opposed to we are indeed tracking the consistency of the investments that are being made in determining how well they're affecting the changes. So I think maybe an addition might be considered in order, Mark, please.
Just put the note down.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. That was great.
I have one more follow-up on that. And we have objective standards around the grant program. And if a local jurisdiction is going to do something, I guess that's more of a question, right? We do have objective standards around our grant program.
Correct.
And if a local jurisdiction is going to do something other than those standards, have they defined why? Careful, like cable.
I only paused because there isn't a program that is actually outside of those.
Right, that's what I'm
identified.
wondering.
Yeah.
I mean, we've talked a little bit about to ensure the grants are going to the highest priority items. And I think that that's already happening.
Correct.
Right. So I just want to make sure that everyone sort of in all the jurisdictions are using the same information about how to prioritize the grants.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So.
And just acknowledging Supervisor Ragoni coming over.
Yeah, welcome, Dennis.
Okay, moving on to transparency, finding 3A, and kind of echoing President McMillan's comments earlier. Now, I've only been involved with and as an employee of 2 governmental agencies, but I've been witness to a lot of governmental agencies, and I think I can, well, I'm biased, but I do think I can be objective in saying I think the MWPA is one of the most transparent organizations I've ever seen. So the word good, I can see how that may not describe exactly where our transparency is.
I just have a problem with that because good implies that there's room for improvement. Good to me is like a B- grade. And when I read the report, I didn't see anything that was deficient. So how can what are we supposed to do to surpass good?
Maybe this would be actually a request to the breakout, the transparency group breakout, to establish a report card.
Okay. And I mean, I'm always in favor of improving and never saying that we're good enough, but identifiable items where we could improve would be helpful.
Yeah, if there are any.
Right. Gotcha.
Great, thank you.
Finding 3B for the most part, and I already touched on this a little bit, the COC was appreciative of staff's collection of data and transmitting that data. However, not all of that data was easily consumable. And staff concurs with that. And for 22-23's review, we have made the amendments that I mentioned earlier. And then the rest of the transparency or the conclusion findings, funds were spent appropriately. Well, we concur. That they feel that there's no reason to believe that local D-space monies have not been spent consistent to Measure C. We concur. Transparency we talked about. And so with that, overall questions.
How many hours do you think the COC spent in creating this report? Because I think people need to understand that this was a huge effort and they're working year round and they are enhancing the MWPA and the community's trust in what we're doing. And so we really owe them a debt of gratitude for their work. But I'm just wondering if you have a kind of a ballpark number.
We can do brainstorming math. 9 members, minimum of 1 meeting a month that typically lasts 2 hours. Then 4 ad hoc subcommittees that when they were working on this were meeting once or twice a month for 2 hours at a time for about a 6-month period, if not more. So 4 times 2 is 8 hours, times twice a month is 16 hours. Times 6 is, so we're talking thousands of hours of volunteer time.
And then the conversations that happened outside the one-on-one. Yeah.
Yes, thousands of hours from,
So it's an incredible amount of work.
yes,
So we thank
volunteer
them.
time.
Yes. We're all volunteers.
Question related
Yes,
to that.
Bruce.
I recall the first COC report, one of the requests was that MWPA help them in pulling the final report together, and we agreed that we would do so. Exactly how, Mark, I don't know, but did we indeed step up with editing and authorship and editing and formatting and all that? I just like to know what role we played in supporting their production of the final report.
So the ad hoc subcommittees did the vast majority of the writing because it really should be them doing the writing. Then staff supported creating consistency in voice and tenor between the 4 different versions of it. Also that there wasn't, if there was overlap, there was appropriate overlap, just wasn't duplicative. Then it went back to kind of a polishing subcommittee of the COC. They made sure that staff functioned in a way that they felt was appropriate. And then we secured a graphical editor to put the final package together. Oh, yeah. The most important part, though, was, and we succeeded in this very much, and we're improving upon it, is rather than the COC going to each member agency asking for the data is coming to the MWPA, and then the MWPA pushes it to the COC. And we've very much clarified the process with the COC and MWPA staff that the flow for COC to gather data from the member agencies is through the MWPA and not direct to the member agencies.
Any other questions for Mark before we open it up to the public? Martina.
If there are any members of the public wishing to speak on the current agenda item, the Citizens Oversight Committee report for fiscal year 2021 to 22, please raise your hand in the reactions or press *9 to raise your hand if you're joining us by phone, and *6 to unmute yourself. And there are no hands for comment.
before I do want to recognize that we have several of our COC members in virtual attendance, and I want them to hear me say thank you very much for all their work.
Yes. We all say thank you very much virtually. Hopefully you can come to our reception after the November 16th meeting and we can tell you thank you in person. Yes, Rachel.
So this was 21-22. Right now we're in this year, we're 23-24. So because we didn't have this feedback would not necessarily, because it's just coming forward now, presumably the same concerns would be applicable for 22-23, which is being worked on.
The good news is, since staff was involved in all of the discussions as they formulated the 21-22 report, we actually started implementing many of these recommendations during 22-23. So we feel that you won't see a repeat of the findings.
Otherwise, we're always chasing. Right?
Correct.
Okay, so we'll be, okay, perfect. Thank you.
Great. Anybody else? Yeah, Catherine.
I see this was a real learning experience between us. I think we learned what our lane is. They learned what their lane is. We developed a trust that, I'm hoping that we did through the transparency by making everything available, and also just adding extra information wherever needed. So I want to thank all parties, not, staff as well as the COC, for this very good report. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great comment, Catherine. Thank you. Anybody else?
Here.
Yes. Okay. Thank
And
you, Mark.
it's a little bit out of sync, but we already did public comment, but I do see Rebecca Suggs raising her hand, if you don't mind.
Yes,
Getting up, so.
Rebecca.
And you should be able to deliver your comment.
Okay. Speaking for myself, this wasn't a vote by the COC to make a comment. Thank you, Mark, for having scrubbed through the report, picked out the recommendations to be made, and doing such a clear and concise summary of it all. I appreciate it. I'll say I imagine others on the committee would also appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Rebecca. Okay. Let's move on to number 9. There are no information items. Number 10, Board of Directors Agenda Review for November 16th. Mark.
I'll start off by saying that somebody who was entering data into our agenda planning worksheet, he's wearing a gray shirt with short sleeves, forgot to put the COC report into the agenda planning worksheet. Therefore, the COC report was not listed as an action item in the Board of Directors meeting. So that will be remedied. We will also be putting in the appropriate request to the board to apply for the CDWG grant. A reminder that we're targeting not to have a meeting in December, both exec committee and board of directors meeting. And given the really robust content that we are looking at in November, we have the Fire Safe Marin annual report. We have a presentation from retired Fire Chief Bob Roper on the report of the Wildland Fire Mitigation and Management Commission, which I'm actually starting my executive summary review to provide to the board, so it can be delivered to the board prior to Chief Roper's presentation. Then we have the San Rafael San Anselmo fuel reduction zone project specific analysis to deliver, and we have the COC report to deliver. As exciting and as much as we're looking forward to hearing Chief Martinelli from Marin County Fire talk about prescribed fire, I think maybe we need to. Thank you. Yep. Thank you, Bruce. So kind of move that item to January.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Otherwise, I think we're gonna be having a very, very long meeting in November. So I think Chief Martinelli will be able to deliver it for us in January.
Yeah, no urgency. It's just my intent is that the board really become much more aware as far as what the situation is in regards to applying prescribed fire on the landscape. There's no urgency, nothing like a rainy day to talk about prescribed fire. So let's
There
wait
you
until
go.
January.
Perfect. Thank you. Any other questions about the,
Public comment on this item, Martina?
If there are any members of the public wishing to speak on the Board of Directors Agenda Review Item 10A, please raise your hand in the reactions or press star 9 if you're joining us by phone. And there are no hands for comment.
Thank you. Bringing this back to the committee. Any further discussion? Right, number 10, committee members' request for future agenda items. Any items? Number 11, it says 12, but I'll go with 11. We will now adjourn the meeting and I will see you all at the board meeting on November 16th. Thank you.
and just to follow up on a reminder, reception following the November meeting.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
And team.
Yeah.
Really great.